All right, we talked now a lot about conformity. Now we are talking about compliance. And compliance is something really different than conformity. And you can see that most easily by demonstrating it. And I'll show you what the difference is by using a recent study. So in this study, so for instance, imagine that you're invited to a study, okay? And what would happen is, imagine that you come to the study and you sit down and there's a fellow student and he's asking you, hey, before we start the study, can you please hand me over your phone and give me your passcode because I have to go into the other room and check something on your phone, okay? So what would you do? Would you give them your phone with your passcode so that they can go to another room and do whatever they want to do there or not? So if this is asking, I think these are Yale students, if you ask them what they think they would do, then they say, interestingly, 26% say, hey, I would not give my phone. 26 say I would give my phone. Okay. Interestingly, they comply more often hypothetically than when they were asked what a reasonable person would do, right? And you can see basically the reasonable person, that is somewhat the norm. This is what you should do. This is what the acceptable behavior in this situation. Now, why this study is so interesting is that not only did they ask students to kind of be forecasters, in a different experiment, a different set of students were actually what they here call experiencers. They let people, they actually invited people to a study and asked them exactly what I just told you. So people were actually ask in a study, give me your phone, give me your code, I go to the other side and just to in the other room and check something. What do you think? How many comply? 97%. So basically everyone who was asked in a study, so the more than 100 students, basically everyone in that study said, like, here's my phone, here's my passcode, even though this does not align with the norm that the forecasters lay out. So I think it's really important here to see, and this is what we are talking about, the power of the direct ask for a favor to change your behavior. So compliance behavior is basically the response to a direct, specific favor. I want you to do X. When are you more likely or less likely to comply to that? So in general, I think the literature is really soaked up by people who are into sales. So on the right side, you see a car salesperson. He's trying to sell you a car. He's really interested in how can you ask for this favor. Please buy that car in a way that makes it more likely that you will buy a car from him. And in this chapter and the next chapter, we talk a lot about these strategies. So if you're somewhat interested in this type of research, in this type of application, then you're really at home in marketing or consumer behavior, and maybe you should be contemplating pursuing a career like that. But it's also something you might be interested in if you're trying to help a good cause. So similar agencies like refugee agencies and charities in general have to kind of ask for a favor. Please donate some money to us in a way that makes it more likely that we will give, right? And so a lot of people are really interested in that, not only psychologists, but it's like one of the biggest areas of applied social psychology. How can we get people to comply to our behaviors? So here's one answer. This is a famous study by Alan Langer and colleagues very early on. They used back in the day still Xerox machines here on the top, and you see the Xerox machine. And often, if you experience it, I grew up basically in a university being a assistant to a professor where you constantly were waiting for the Xerox machine because they were super slow, it took forever, it was a real pain. So you would wait there often 10, 15, 20 minutes, and now imagine it's me coming along here and asking, hey, can I cut the line? So what would happen if I just says, hey, can I get in front of the line? I need to use the machine. 60% of the times it would work, okay? 60% of the times the people waiting there would let the person in front. And that shows you the mere power, the sheer power of just asking. Often simply asking for something is enough, okay? Even if it inconveniences the other people. But if you kind of stick to a more traditional layout, you can dramatically increase your chances. So often if we ask to comply to a reason, right, to a favor, we want a reason. So why do you have to cut the line? Well, I'm in a rush. I'm really in a rush. People might then immediately assume that, okay, you're a teacher. Your class is about to start here. Please go ahead. I understand. So 94% now let the person in front, right? It's basically everyone says like, okay, you're in a rush. But interestingly, and this is why this study became famous, is what happens if you just say something nonsense. I think they call it here, you see that, placebic information. It's like a placebo. They stick to the traditional outline of I need to get cut because, but then I say I need to make copies. So there's no difference in content between these two. But because you stick to the structure, people are more likely to comply with your behavior. And the idea here is, which really took hold, is that often we comply just out of pure mindlessness. So if you kind of ask me in an accepted way in that situation, then I will comply to your favor. There's some interesting research on, which is called the PK technique. So what if you kind of try to interrupt our mindless processing of complying, asking for favors. So often I think most of you guys will at least experience London. We live in London. We see homeless people. Homeless people ask us for some money. And so in the US, it's often, can you spare a quarter? So you have heard that already. And basically you have this kind of trained way of ignoring that ask for a favor. But what happens if you can ask them, can you spare 17 cents? So she's like, oh, 17 cents. That's an odd request. Okay. Why does he need 17 cents? Why is he not asking for a quarter? So now you kind of interrupt the mindless processing, and now people are more willing to be persuaded by this message and to comply and give money. I really remember when I was in New York, there was a person who was sitting very close every day, very close to where I was working, and he always had a really interesting line, and I would be often very much persuaded to give him money, and he was very popular with the students. I remember once he had saving for a lightsaber to revenge my family, can you help? I still remember that. It's like 10 years, 12 years ago. So I thought, that was like, that made me laugh, and it's like, okay. He also said like, Obama's not the only dude that once changed. That was the time when Obama was campaigning in the US to become president-elect, and he says like he was campaigning on let's make change happen. Yes, we can do change. And he said, well, he's not the only one who wants change. I want change too. And this really kind of disrupts your mindless processing of the compliance. And so you can use the disruption of mindless behavior or mindless behavior in itself in order to convince people to comply with your favor. Before we kind of go on, I just want to kind of introduce one person who will be heavily featured in the next chapter, but I want to kind of tease that a little bit here. And this is here on the left, Robert Cialdini. He wrote a book which is called Influence. I think he has a more updated version. This is the book I read. This is the book I read. I think he has a revised edition here, but he has something now that's called just Persuasion, which is basically the same content. And it might be the most influential, at least one of the most influential psychology books ever written, probably the most influential book in anything that has to do with marketing, with persuasion, with political messaging, all that kind of area, right? And the interesting bit about Robert Cialdini and why I'm telling you about is he said what we have to do is, as social psychologists, we have to go out there and see who are the people who are really successful. We shouldn't care so much about the theories. We just kind of do it the other way around. We should go out there and study the most successful businessmen. We should study the most successful people who back on the street and make a lot of money. Who are we more likely to give to? We study their techniques, and that's what we learn. People who are in sales basically constantly experimenting with their techniques in order to get something better. So it's a really rapid process of technique, like of application feedback, much more quicker than what we can do in a lab. And then we should kind of see if this works, if they are generalizable principles. And he now, I think he retired, basically he left academia a little bit frustrated that not everyone was kind of so much smitten by this idea than he was. But he has this book is amazing, and basically the book tells you about his adventures where he's studying these successful people, salespeople, And one example I give you in a second is like, how do they do that? How come they are much, much more successful than other people, co-worker, and so forth? He now has a company. It's called Influence at Work. I think they have a London section as well. One of my former students, she is working there now. So you can apply his principles, and he's teaching businesses and others, whoever wants to listen, how to use these principles. One of the very earlier chapters on is reciprocity, and he says like there's this immediately tit for tat that is all hardwired in us. He's the plethora, there are like tons of really good examples for that. The first one that always stuck to my mind is like he's sitting at the airport and seeing their Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna is like bagging, and they see that they're so successful. They're at the airport, they're asking for donations, and almost everyone is doing it. And the way they do it is like they offer a rose or a flower first, and then they ask for a donation. So here you can see they offer something. So here you can have, for instance, this book for free, and then, hey, can you give us a bit of a donation? And why this is so powerful, it seems like people are immediately convinced that if they're basically bet is tit for tat, you did me something, I have to give you something back, right? You can see this here. This is like the reason why you constantly get free samples. Everybody wants to give you something for free because you now so feel indebted. And then often what they ask you is much bigger than what you gave. So food samples, for instance, free food samples pay massively for supermarkets, for companies, and that's why we do them, or that's why they do them, not me in this case. So reciprocity, if you kind of start before you ask for a favor by doing them a little favor, right? That's a really powerful way to get people to consent, and then you can ask for something bigger. In the book, a little bit cheekily, they kind of allude to that also in the framework of dates. And they wonder, why is the man always bringing a present to the date? If you think about tit for tat, if I bring you flowers, if I bring you chocolate, does the person who receives them now feel a little bit indebted? And you can wonder what they would like to have in return. One example that I want to finish here of Robert Cialdini's book that also stuck to my mind is like this guy. He's a super successful salesperson, and every winter he would, around Christmas time, he would write everyone a thank you card for their business. Every one of his customers, a handwritten thank you note saying, I wish you Merry Christmas to your family. Good luck. Thank you. Really grateful for what you did to me. He would do it. He was the only one. And it seems like he would do it because he does a little something for you, a little smile on your face, a little show of gratitude. And the next time when he says, you know what, we just upgraded our car fleet, why don't you come in and have a look? You're more likely to consent to that.